Hello, this is Draculus from the Phoenix and server 832. Today I wanted to talk about components. Once you've gathered your components, head to the arsenal. You'll notice here you have multiple sets that you can assign. The reason for this is that you can have one set for PvP, player versus player, another set for PvE, player versus environment, like boss fights or droids. Now I'm going to go over which components to use in which situation. I'll start with PvP. When fighting against other players, the components to focus on are high rate of fire, armor buff, damage increase, weapon buff, and reduced damage taken. Let's go through each one of those components so we understand what they do. The most critical component to focus on in PvP is high rate of fire. If you are evenly matched with your opponent, whoever attacks first will win, and high rate of fire decides who attacks first. The second most important component is weapon buff. This increases your attack. We'll go into this later, what attack is and how it works, but for now just understand that this is your second most important component after high rate of fire. Next is damage increase. Does exactly what it says, increases your base damage output. And then to go along with that is reduced damage taken, which reduces the amount of damage that your opponent does to you. And finally, we have armor buff. This increases the hit points of your units. PvP is all about outliving your opponent, making sure that you can do maximum amount of damage, but most importantly, making sure that they die first. In player versus environment, where you're fighting against a world boss or an alliance droid, there's no way that you're going to outlive it, so these components are all about maximizing damage output. I've already talked about weapon buff and damage increase, so I'll only cover here hit, crit buff, and crit damage. Every time your players attack, there is a chance that they will miss the opponent, which does 0 damage. Hit increases the chance of hitting. Each time you hit your opponent, there is a chance that you will have a critical hit. Critical hits do increase damage. Crit buff increases the chance of getting a crit. And crit damage increases the damage output from that crit. I hope this makes sense. The PvP goal is to outlive your opponent. The PvE goal is to inflict maximum damage on an opponent that you're never going to beat. Earlier I mentioned weapon buff, how it increases your attack, and I said I'd circle back, so I just want to talk about this quickly. Your weapon buff increases attack. Attack is a multiplier on your base damage. So if your base damage is higher, your multiplier from attack will be higher as well. Now, the game doesn't actually say this. I'm piecing it together based on information that I found online and experience in other games. So let's do some math just so I can show you what I mean. Let's assume that you have a base damage of 100 and you have an increased damage component which gives you 35%. 35% of 100 brings you to 135 total damage. Now, you also have that attack component which gives you 160%. 160% of that value is 351. Now you can do 351 damage. But let's assume you don't have that increased damage component. But you do still have the 160% attack component. 160% of 100 is only 260. There's a difference there of 91. And that's all I have on components. I recommend you go back and you take a look at the component sets that I used earlier. Try to use the same ones for yourself. When you're attacking the world boss, just switch to that. And then when you're doing everything else, basically use your PvP set. Thank you.